Hi, my name is Callie Chappelle, and thanks for joining me on this video about Topicality, Part 2, How to Run Topicality. This is a video that's part of my Novice Go Fight Win series that teaches novices how to do policy debate. So, my name is Callie Chappelle. I'm a debater for the University of Michigan, and I debated for Traverse City Central High School back when I was in high school. I'm a second negative, first affirmative speaker, and I believe that breadth is better than depth any day. Alright, so how do you make the most out of these videos? You should take notes, and you should definitely rewatch bits that you need re-explained. Topicality specifically is kind of a uniquely confusing argument because it's not very intuitive, and it's very different than other types of debates. So if you have to go back and rewatch parts, that's totally okay. Next, you don't need to memorize it all. At least be familiar with everything in the video because it's a building process, but you don't have to know the third word on the third slide. Trust me, I just had a class where I did have to know that, and it was terrible, and I want to make this a fun and enjoyable and educational experience for you. And finally, your coach may like things differently, or you may like to debate in a different style. You may not be the kind of debater who necessarily wants to be reading Topicality. That's totally okay, but you need to be familiar with Topicality because it is an argument that you will definitely hear in your debate career. Alright, Throwback Thursday. So back to part 1, the basics. So we talked about the big ideas behind Topicality. So why do we run Topicality in the debate, and how does Topicality function as a distinctively different argument than a substantive argument such as disads and counterplans. In fact, Topicality is known as a procedural argument, not a substantive debate argument. And we also talked about what makes a good definition. So how do we analyze sources in Topicality debates to indicate that they're better or worse than other sources. Alright, so how do you run Topicality on the neg? Well, a T violation consists of 3 different things. First is the interpretation, second is the violation, and third is the voting issue. So, the interpretation is just a definition of a word or a wording in the resolution. So it's where we define non-military, it's where we define exploration and or development, it's where we define USFG, just for some examples. Next is the violation. So this is the reason why the aff doesn't meet the definition and is therefore not topical. So, for example, if the interpretation is non-military means nothing related to the military, and the aff is a icebreakers aff, the violation could be that icebreakers are typically used in the military, so icebreakers would not be considered non-military, or they would be considered military. And finally is the voting issue. So these usually consist of 3 different reasons. First, why your definition is fair for the aff team, so the aff team can read lots of affs. Second is the reason why the definition is fair for the neg team, so why the neg can't do cheating stuff under this definition. And third is why predictable limits, the predictable limits that are caused by your definition, are important for fair and educational debate. So this is a great starting point for novices to kind of understand the reasoning behind different voting issues. However, as you develop your skills debating Topicality, and as you learn to debate Topicality in a little more nuanced way, sometimes you'll say, instead of like, subpoint A, reason why my definition is fair for the aff is, or subpoint B, my reason why my definition is fair for the neg is, you'll say something like, we have 2 standards, that is predictability and limits. Okay, so I just wanted you to know kind of where we're going in the future and be able to contrast this in your mind where you're building a starting point with these structures for voting issues to eventually graduate to the more varsity level. Just to let you know, there are other names for voting issue. They are voters and standards. So don't be confused if you hear these terms. They just refer to the same. They all refer to the same thing. Alright, so here are some examples of affs and violations. So here's example 1. So I have 2 different affs that violate the Earth's oceans words in the resolution. So aff 1 is this, that the USFG should increase aquaculture in Lake Michigan because Lake Michigan is awesome. Okay, the second one is the USFG should increase aquaculture on Uranus, or on Uranus's oceans. So both of these violate Earth's ocean. So Lake Michigan is obviously a lake, it's not an ocean, and Uranus is not on Earth, right? So those 2 affs would not be topical because they are not related to Earth's oceans. Alright, so here's example 2. The aff is that California should build desalination plants. So the neg violation is of the U.S. federal government, that the California is not the USFG, okay? So here are examples of different affs and how you can easily pick out how they're not topical and what words specifically in the resolution they do not fit under. So that's an important skill for you to be able to practice. One way you can practice this is just going onto the wiki page or just going onto NDCA Open Evidence and looking at affs and thinking about how this would not be topical under the resolution. Sometimes they're more ambiguous in this than the examples that I just gave you, but being able to finesse and figure out what they could violate and what they do violate is a very important skill to have. So I'm going to go through an example, topicality, so you can get a framework in your mind for what a topicality debate looks like and all the parts, working parts of it and how they work together. So the violation that I'm going to use is non-military excludes icebreakers. So I'm going to have some topicality speeches that you should practice flowing, and you should also take notes separately. So the aff that we're going to assume was read was an aff that increases non-military icebreaker usage for research, okay? So let's get started. So here's an example of 1NC with non-military violation. So A is the interpretation. 1. Non-military means not belonging to, characteristic of, or involving armed forces. Oxford Dictionary 2014. Not belonging to, characteristic of, or involving armed forces, civilian, the widespread destruction of non-military targets. You can notice I'm going to spread kind of slowly for you to just hear what that sounds like. And 2. Using the military in a non-combat role is still military exploration and or development because it employs the military structure and the aff is a non-combat role. Brown 12. The term non-military is used here to refer to roles that are not located within army or militia structures, since the roles within military structures involve both combat and non-combat roles. The term non-combat can be used to refer to ancillary roles within the military, which is not the focus of this study. Okay, so what does this say? This just is two definitions of non-military. The first one saying that it's not at all involved with the armed forces. That's the Oxford Dictionary card. And also that even using military things such as icebreakers in a non-combat role is still military exploration because it still uses the structure of the military, right? So in the context of the aff, the using icebreakers, even if it's just for research, is still considered military because it still uses the military structures such as the Navy, DARPA, and icebreakers themselves, which are inherently military related. Alright, so B is the violation. So the aff increases icebreakers, which are characteristic of the armed forces and are therefore non-topical. You may want to have a card here that just says icebreakers are involved in the military, but I think for all intents and purposes, people know that, and if they question that claim, then you can always have a backup card that you could read in later speeches. C is the voting issue. 1 is aff ground. Under our definition, the aff can read any aff that is not associated with the military. For example, they can read an aff that increases aquaculture, offshore wind, etc. Second is neg ground. The military is an entirely different branch of jurisdiction than most organizations that deal with the oceans, such as NOAA. Our DA links are predicated off exploration and development of these non-military arenas. Being able to predict the aff or have predictable limits is key to fair and educational debate. Okay? So those are the three parts. Why it's fair for the aff, why it's fair for the neg, and why the definition that we've chosen creates predictable limits that are important for fair and educational debate. Alright, so why are predictable limits important for educational debate and fair debate? So why are these two things important when you walk out of a debate round? So how will fair and educational debate help you in the real world? Well, let's talk about this. So educational debate is important because what do you walk out of? So think about maybe depending on how long you're in the activity, 4 years from now, 8 years from now if you do college debate. What do you get out of the activity? Well, you obviously get a lot of in-depth knowledge about the debate topics that you've debated, but you also get a lot of knowledge about kind of how to be good, have good advocacy skills, and have good understandings of how governmental processes work. And the only way that we can talk about these skills is, especially ones related to the topic, are if you're actually talking about the topic and you're well prepared for debates. And the only way that you can be well prepared for these debates is if you have something predictable that you actually can debate about, which is why it's important to have kind of a limited topic so we can be prepared as negative debaters to address any possible affirmative. And second is fair debate. Obviously, if you keep going into rounds and you keep losing for dumb reasons because debate is inherently stacked to the aff, then I wouldn't want to debate. I just wouldn't want to debate. And I don't think you, as novices, would want to debate in that world either if it was incredibly unfair. So it's important to be able to create the rules of debate that allow fair debate to happen. And debate is really unique in that it gives you an outlet in topicality and theory arguments to be able to create the rules in debate and explain a form of debate in a debate round that should be happening and make that thing that you say should happen actually happen by using the judge's ballot to fulfill that request. All right. So remember that topicality is only about the plan. So this is something that novices get really, and even varsity debaters sometimes get confused about. So T is only about the plan text, right? It only is about what the plan text says the plan does, not the advantages. So the app can read any advantage they want as long as they stem from a topical plan text. So let's say the plan text is really topical, but one of the advantages is about space exploration. Well, obviously, space exploration itself isn't topical, right? It's not about ocean exploration and development, but because it stems from an affirmative that is topical, for example, aquaculture, then that app would be considered topical, okay? So the apps can read, as I said, any advantage they want as long as they stem from a topical plan text. This term that says that you should just evaluate the plan text and not the advantages is called plan text in a vacuum. So if the other team tries shenanigans, if they try to tell you that your app isn't topical because your advantages aren't topical, then you tell the judge to only evaluate the what the plan text says, or to evaluate the plan text in a vacuum. So this is an important concept to understand, that it's only about the plan text. All right, so how do you answer topicality on the app? Well, there are two main approaches, and you should do both of these things in a debate round. First is a we meet. So you should argue that you meet the neg violation. So how you should explain how your plan fits under their interpretation of a specific word. So in the context of non-military, if the neg says the AF is icebreakers and that is military, which violates non-military, you should rebut and say, no, actually we are non-military, right? So you could say like, well, the specific icebreakers that the AF uses is not at all associated with the larger military structure that the negatives evidence is talking about. Okay, so you should say the AF does meet their interpretation. And second, you need to counter-define. So you need to read your own interpretation or definition of the word in question and argue that your interpretation is better for any of these reasons that we talked about previously: intent to define, recency, qualifications, consensus, uses multiple words, or precision. Okay, so you also, not only do you have to say that you meet their interpretation, but you also have to read your own interpretation and argue why your interpretation is better. So I'm going to give an example 2AC against a non-military violation. So this would be the 2AC that comes after the 1NC that we just talked about, okay? So first is counterinterpretation. Military assets can be used for non-military exploration and or development, GAZDEV 10. In the maritime realm, carriers, vessels, and destroyers that were designed to contain the Soviet Navy which might be used in a similar role vis-a-vis China in the future, are now being used to conduct activities to improve human security. The response to the Haiti earthquake saw an aircraft carrier and 16 other warships provide humanitarian and rescue services such as non-military missions to help to the U.S. and reinforce ties to other states. Revron quotes a Navy official who notes that using a war assets for non-military missions such as humanitarian relief means that we can provide resources and leave very little footprint behind. So what this card is saying is, yeah, we can use military assets for non-military exploration and development. It's still a distinct kind of method in which we're using the military for specifically non-military purposes. Second, we meet. Even if they win their interpretation, icebreakers are non-military. And ideally, we'd have a piece of evidence here to prove that icebreakers can be used in a non-military sense that was described by the GAZDEV evidence. All right. And finally, the voting issue. AF ground. Much of the current ocean research and development has been in the context of the military. Limiting out converting military technology to non-military uses eliminates a huge amount of research in AF ground. Second is neg ground. The neg has better DA and counterplane ground since the AF lit base is better, so it causes more in-depth and better research debates. So what I'm saying here is, because there's so much research relating to the ocean and the military, the neg has a lot better reasons, like a lot better disad, such as the hedge disad, and counterplane ground, like with different military mechanisms, because there's just more research there for the AF. And finally, prefer our evidence. We're from a national security studies expert with a definition in the intersection of military and non-military, and you should default to reasonability. If we're reasonably topical, you should not vote on topicality. Alright, so let's talk about reasonability. So reasonability is an AF argument that says that if the AF is reasonably topical, then the judge should not vote neg on topicality. So AF, you should keep explaining this or extending this, and that means extending this argument if the other team drops it. Honestly, on this topic, I think the judges will default to reasonability, so it's a powerful tool in your arsenal. Haha, military pun. Alright, I'll stop. Actually, I'm gonna revise this. You should just extend reasonability at every speech, regardless of whether or not they drop it, but make sure that reasonability is in there, because honestly, a lot of judges aren't gonna pull the trigger on an AF that's super topical. They're just not. Alright, so how do you answer reasonability on the negative? Well, there are 3 big reasons. First, it's arbitrary, because no one knows exactly what is reasonable. And second, you still have to prove that you're reasonable. The AF still has to win their definition to prove that they're reasonable in the first place. And finally is judge intervention. Ultimately, the judge has to decide whether the AF is reasonable, and that takes the debate out of the hands of the debaters and just goes into kind of what the judge thinks should be going on, instead of allowing us to debate it out in the debate round. Alright, so T in an actual debate. So here's how it usually goes down. This is just kind of the length in which T is usually extended, so you get an idea of how much time we spend on T. So the 1NC is usually around 30 seconds. The 2ACs are usually around 30 to 45 seconds. The 1NR is usually 4 to 5 minutes of T in the block. The 2NR is the entire speech. Seriously, if you are going to extend T, only extend T. And also condo if the 1AR extends it. And then obviously the 2AR, the entire speech is just about topicality. You don't have to extend your AF. So seriously, this is really important. If you extend T in the 2NR, only extend T. Do not extend anything else. Do not extend a dised. Do not extend a counterplan. Just extend T. If you don't have 5 minutes of material to talk about T at a fast pace in the 2NR, then you're not doing it right. You're not doing enough analysis, and you're not extending everything and answering all the AF arguments that need to be done. So you should absolutely only go for T. So coming up next time in part 3, we're going to talk about developing T. So we're going to talk about advanced T techniques, how to give a rebuttal on topicality, and then strategies on how to give a really great speech on topicality. So I hope to see you in that video, and I hope this was educational. Thanks!